Hi everybody, welcome back to Aquatics. If you're new here, my name's Adam, and a few weeks ago I did a video on how to succeed with low-tech planted aquariums. And I just gave a few pointers and a few little tips on how I run my planted aquariums and how I manage to succeed with good plant growth and to keep algae to a minimum. But I thought, well, we can't really talk about planted tanks unless we actually talk about algae as well, because in all aquariums there's going to be some levels of algae. And when you're trying to establish a beautiful planted tank, different types of algae can cause you many issues. So during, when you're sort of dealing with those issues, many people, and I've seen this, I've heard this in fish shops, I've seen it online, many people reach for a fish. They ask questions about which fish will eat this algae, etc. And I just wanted to do a video on why I think that not only do you not need to keep fish that eat algae, there are also some better alternatives out there. So yeah, I'm going to cover those in this video, so I hope you enjoy. So a common misconception in the hobby is that if you see a tank that's got algae present, be it on the glass or on the plants, we consider this tank not to be clean because, aesthetically it doesn't look clean. Too much algae can be quite ugly to look at. So there's this perception that a tank that has algae is a dirty tank, which of course is not true. Algae in many ways can be an indication that your tank is healthy, and you've probably heard quite a few people online recently talking about a seasoned aquarium. So very often having all these different algae in your tank, and I'll come on to which ones you want in there and which ones you don't, could be an indication that things are working really well. But they can also be an indication that things are not working so well, and your tank is giving you little insights on how you can deal with those situations. So we have to remember that wherever there is light and water and nutrients and CO2, there's going to be algae. It's a naturally occurring thing. You can't get away with it. And when you've seen all these sort of beautiful aquascapes, online that are all high-tech and CO2 and everything else, as much as it'd be very difficult to see that algae in there, it's definitely in there. And if you looked closely enough, you'd certainly see it. It's just those fish keepers and aquascapers do a very good job of managing that algae, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video as well. So the types of algae that affect aquariums mainly, so you could have the brown diatom algae, which is like a brown dusty covering, which you'll see over glass and over your hardscape and your plants. Very often we see this when a tank is new, a new tank is establishing itself. And it's a good indication that the natural process is starting to happen and bacteria is starting to form. And very often these brown diatom algae will disappear in favour of green ones and other ones. So again, if you see in brown sort of algae in your aquarium, it's an indication that things are moving in the right direction, especially if it's a new tank. If it's a more established tank, then it'd be an indication of other issues. Another one you'll see in the aquarium is green algae, which tends to be, in established tanks, it tends to be the one that is the most common one. And it's, again, that is an indication of a healthy tank. And you certainly want to be seeing that, be it on rocks, sometimes on the glass. But obviously you don't want too much. And the point I'm trying to make is that excessive algae within your tank is what could indicate that there are wider issues. And that's what we need to sort of look at and not necessarily reach for fish to deal with that. So there are types of algae which you'll find in your aquarium which are worse than others. So you have the infamous blackbeard algae, which if that's not managed, it can definitely deplete oxygen in your tank. It can suffocate plants. So it can cause a lot of problems. Another one which can do that is staghorn algae. There's a tank behind me, my daughter's aquarium, which we do have a staghorn algae issue at the moment, which I'm hoping to address in the coming days and weeks, really. So those are two sort of potentially bad ones because it can cause issues with oxygen levels and with suffocating plants. Another one which you might find is blue-green algae, which is not really an algae at all. It's more of a bacteria. It's known as cyanobacteria. And again, that's something which is not a good sign, and it's something that you'll want to address. There could be many reasons for it, and I'll come back to that as well in the video. So as I say, there's many benefits of having algae in a tank. It could be a good sign, and it could also be a bad sign. the most important thing to remember is it's perfectly natural to have algae in your aquarium, but you don't want too much of it, and we can use that as an indication as to whether things need looking at or whether things are working well. So as I say, you'll hear a lot of YouTubers refer to it as seasoning a tank or having a seasoned tank, and there's a lot of fish which like to graze on algae and will do that sort of, every day anyway. One that's quite a common one for doing it is live bearers. Many live bearers will graze on algae all day, whereas with other fish you might not see them do that so much. So yeah, it's I would say with algae it's something that you definitely want it in your tank. You don't want to be battling it all the time, but you definitely want some background levels because that's a good sign. So of course, why does algae get out of control? Well, it gets out of control because there's an imbalance of something. So that could be that, there's too much light. Maybe your lighting is on for too long. Maybe the lighting intensity is too much. It could be that there is a buildup of organics in the tank, such as, uneaten food, rotting plants, that sort of thing. And that can contribute to it as well. It could be that there's a CO2 imbalance. So if you've got a high-tech tank and you're using injected CO2, maybe, there's fluctuating levels of CO2. In my tanks, I don't use injected CO2, so the background CO2 levels are coming from the fish and coming from sort of decaying matter that might be in the tank. But any one of those things can cause an imbalance, and that's when you can have an outbreak of algae. And of course, if that happens, you definitely want to deal with that as quickly as you can, really, before it becomes a bigger problem. So if you're dealing with, an algae outbreak and it's covering the glass and it looks ugly and it's really unsightly, then there's a few things you're going to want to do to address that. Now, a lot of people might reach for chemicals. I would always suggest that should be as a last resort, really. And again, there's a few ways of doing it. So if you test your water and you find the nitrates are quite high, then that could indicate that you've got an abundance of nutrients and you need to get those down. So you could try doing a water change. You could do a big water change of maybe sort of 50%. That'd be a good way of getting them down. You might want to reduce your lighting. So if you're running your lights for 12 hours a day, bring them down to 10 hours a day and see if it improves things. If not, go even lower. As I covered in my other video, I set mine to 6 hours of light per day, and I find that I get good plant growth and minimal algae. The exception being the tank that's behind me, my daughter's tank, which for some reason I'm having issues with it. But that's for another video. I'm going to try something with that, so I'll cover that in another one. But I don't normally have issues like that. So yeah, it's a bit of a pain, but we'll come back to that. As I say, you could use chemicals if you wish, and one that's commonly used is algaecide. So like C-Chem Excel is an algaecide which you can use, and you could either spot dose it, so go directly onto the algae, or you could drop it in the tank. And that will help to keep that down. But again, unless you're addressing the underlying causes, it's going to keep coming back. The other one might be that if you're using a plant fertilizer, maybe you're putting too much plant fertilizer in, maybe you want to reduce that a little bit. Or, maybe that sand or gravel just needs a bit of a clean. Maybe there's organics building up, is there a piece of wood in there which is rotting away quicker than maybe you think, or maybe you've got some leaf litter which is kind of rotting away. These are all things which can contribute to increasing levels of algae. Another way of dealing with it is you could add more plants, because if there's excess nutrients and you don't have enough plants, then the algae is going to use those excess nutrients to grow. So, you've probably seen a lot of aquascapers and planted tank channels where they just add more and more plants, and you can do that. Of course you can. One I like to use is floating plants. I find that floating plants just absolutely consume so much waste. And, you can really reduce sort of background levels of nutrients in your tank as well. You just have to be careful that you don't build up too many floating plants, because they can also cause you problems. They can take light away from other plants that are lower down in your aquarium. So you just have to be careful and make sure that you're thinning those out maybe, every couple of weeks. So this brings me on to the point of the video, really, which is why you don't need algae-eating fish. And the reason I'm saying that is because I'm personally not a fan of buying fish for a job. And don't get me wrong, I'll be the first to hold my hands up and admit that I've done this. And the problem with that is that you're not addressing the underlying cause of why you're getting such an algae build-up. The other thing is, not all fish, even the ones that are labelled as algae eaters, not all fish will eat all types of algae. So you may still have that problem. And if you pick the fish because of a job rather than you liking the fish, then you're going to be left with a fish that you don't really like and you're not enjoying. And that's going to take up space for fish that you might want to put in, that you might enjoy more. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of doing that. I don't think you need to do that. The other thing is, there are some fish out there which are sold, or certainly labelled or marketed maybe, as algae eaters. And these are your plecos. Now, the thing with that is, not all plecos are actually algae eaters. Some don't eat it, or some are actually carnivores. So it depends on which one you pick. So a common one that people might go for would be a bristlenose pleco. But it's quite commonly known that bristlenose plecos eat more algae when they're younger. As they get older, they have less and less. And the thing with plecos, which is why I don't think they're very good algae eaters anyway, is that they create a lot of waste. And as I've mentioned, one of the reasons why you might have an algae build-up is because of excess waste. So to bring a pleco into that setting and have the pleco try and battle that algae for you, it seems counterintuitive to me. So I don't think you need to have algae-eating fish. I think you can manage background levels of algae yourself. You could do that by following some of the steps I've mentioned. Or you could even just remove it yourself. You know, if it's on the glass, you could scrape it off with an algae scraper as part of your maintenance. So you don't always need to buy a fish to fix a problem for you. So that brings me on to what you should be using in your tank, in my opinion. As I say, this is just some advice on what you might want to do. So what I would suggest is, rather than reach for those algae eating fish, I think a much better algae eater are snails. So those pest snails that people refer to, you know, your ram's horn snails, your bladder snails, which come in a lot on plants that you might buy. Those snails are very beneficial to your aquarium, and they will just munch away at algae. In fact, that's, you know, predominantly what they'll eat anyway. And they'll eat obviously bits of dead leaves and things like that, which you want them to eat dead bits of your plants, because if that's allowed to rot away, that's going to increase the organics in your tank, and that's going to lead to more algae. So snails are an absolutely fantastic algae eater for your tank, and they don't really cost much at all. One of the common reasons why they're referred to as pests is because they do breed a lot, and you can have a massive buildup of them. But the thing is that their population's self-moderating, so the more waste that's in a tank, the more snails you're going to have. And obviously the less waste that's in a tank, the less snails you're going to have. The interesting thing about this is that another one which I would recommend would be Neocaridina shrimp, cherry shrimp. In terms of population, they work in the same way, is that if there's an abundance of food, they'll breed more. If there's less food, they'll breed less. But we don't refer to shrimp as pests, because I guess they look nicer. And I think that's the main reason, but effectively they do the same job. And I would say is that, depending on what fish you're keeping, of course, I think a better algae eater, if you need to get one for your tank, would be snails and shrimp. However, I believe firmly that you don't need fish to manage the algae for you. Don't get me wrong, having fish in there which do eat a bit of algae is going to help keep those background levels down, but it's always going to be there. And that's what you have to remember, is that, you know, I always like to think that I try and embrace it a little bit, and don't fight it too much. Interestingly, the more changes you make to your fish tank to battle algae can actually cause you more issues in the long run. So that's just something to bear in mind, really, is because I've done that myself. You know, this is all, I'm giving this advice because of experiences I've had. I've had issues in tanks because I've caused them. You know, I've changed the lighting, then I've changed it again. I've added fertilizers and I've stopped fertilizers, and it's causing all of these fluctuations. So I would try and get to the root cause of what the issue is first, and then deal with that yourself. And as I say, if you still want to buy algae-eating fish, that's absolutely fine. I would just maybe consider other options as well. So yeah, just in closing, I'm not saying you should never buy algae-eating fish. If you like the fish, buy the fish. You know, it's your tank. If that's what you want to do, that's absolutely fine. For me, I do have algae eaters which I buy. A lot of the fish I keep are nano fish, so I know I can keep things like Neocaridina shrimp, Amano shrimp. I love my ram's horn snails. And I just let them breed because I use them as a way of indicating whether I'm overfeeding or not. So, you know, I have those. I have otter cinclus as well. So, you know, it's good to have a good cleanup crew. I'm just saying that you don't necessarily need to reach for a cleanup crew or reach for algae eaters before you've addressed any underlying issues. And in a lot of my tanks, I clean the algae off the glass. I'll clean it off the front and the side. Very often, I'll just leave it at the back. You know, you don't see the back, all the plant growth there. And it just provides a nice little place for, you know, for snails and shrimp and things to graze on. And to me, it's more natural. You know, as I say, algae is naturally occurring. Wherever there's light and nutrients and water, it's going to be there. So I think sometimes it's worth just embracing it as part of your tanks, really. That's just my opinion. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. And yeah, as I say, I guess you could consider this to be like a part 2 of the other video I did about how to succeed with low-tech planted tanks. As I mentioned at the start of the video, there is an issue with this tank with some staghorn algae. And I've got an idea about how I'm going to address that. I think part of the problem is there's a big piece of honeycomb wood or dragon wood in there, and it's very close to the light, and it's decaying quite quickly because I can see the sort of build up on the sand because I've got light coloured sand in there. Whether it's because of the corydoras that are in there or whether it's because the wood is just rotting away, I'm not sure. But I've got an idea about what I want to do with it. So stay tuned for that video. It should be on the channel within the next, probably, when's this one coming out? This one will be out this week. So it'll probably be another week before that one's out. But definitely stay tuned for that. Well, I say stay tuned, actually. If it's a bit of an experiment. So if it works, you'll see the video. And if it doesn't work, I'm not going to release a video because there's no point. So yeah, I'm confident it'll work, but definitely watch out for that one. Anyway, thank you for watching, as always. If you're new here and you like these videos, please consider hitting that subscribe button. If you like the video, please hit the like button. It really helps out. It's free to subscribe. You know, there's no charge. So yeah, I'd really appreciate that. And I'll see you on the next video. Bye-bye.